Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to hit the new year with Forza Motorsport, a mostly negative title, which came out October last year. I didn't play much this game because it was not really interesting in the end, and since I already have the footage, why not? So they set up the proposed minimum requirement as the Intel i5 8400 or AMD Ryzen 5 1600. I set up with the 1600 of AMD, 8GB of RAM, NVIDIA GTX 1060, 6 or 3 gig, I don't know, AMD RX 5500 XT, 130GB of SSD, because apparently SSD is required. Welcome to Respawn PC, I'm Dunk, let's game on. I first want to say that we don't know what those proposed minimum requirement is supposed to aim at. Is it 720p or 1080p, 30 FPS or 60 FPS? So I'm going to try various settings at 720p and various settings at 1080p to see how much FPS we get on each. And I'm going to run the include benchmark so we have a consistent result with every settings. They also don't tell you which GTX 1060, the 6 or the 3GB. So we don't know which resolution, we don't know which settings, we don't know at which FPS they're aiming at, and we don't know which card they were looking at. So I'm going to use the 1060 6GB. I'll start at 720p with every setting set to auto. I'm going to enable FSR and put it at quality, and that's the result, 45 FPS. It's quite consistent, it's quite stable, not bad I guess, but if we're looking at 30 FPS or 60 FPS, we're straight in the middle at 45. We still don't know what we're looking at or aiming at what hardware. Since I really don't know where to start, moving out from auto, I'm going to start at 720p Ultra FSR quality, and with those settings we're averaging a 32 FPS. Or let's say their goal was 720p and 30 FPS, you need your setting at Ultra, and you can put FSR at quality. Not bad, I guess. Let's try to see if we can get 60 FPS instead. So I drop the settings to low with FSR balance, and with those settings we get an average of 47 FPS. That is really close to the auto setting with FSR quality when we reach a 45 FPS. I guess not that bad, but we're still missing 13 FPS to reach 60 FPS. So I guess we can drop the FSR to performance and keep the settings at low to try to gain some FPS, but that didn't change anything when you change to FSR performance. We still have 47 FPS, same as balance. But as you notice, the GPU is in the i7 usage and the CPU is in the 30-40. We have quite a lot of headroom. I'm going to try Ultra Performance, but I'm pretty sure that won't change much. And just like I said, Ultra Performance for FSR at 720p, we gain 1 FPS, so we're now at 48 FPS. So maybe the proposed minimum requirement was to reach 45 FPS. Another thing that is settled is the GTX 1060. It's probably the 6GB because we well over the 3GB of usage. At least we figured out which GTX they were talking about. The 3 or the 6, it's definitely the 6GB. Now, if we bump the resolution to 1080p, we put the settings still at low, FSR I put it at balance, it's quite playable, we get a 43 FPS. And surprisingly enough, the GPU seems to have some headrooms available to crank a bit the settings. Still have some usage room and some memory room. Bumping up a bit the settings to medium, still FSR balance, we get an average of 44 FPS. Surprisingly enough, it's 1 FPS more than low settings. So my guess, if I pump to high settings, does my FPS will also bump a little bit higher? Bumping up the settings at high and pushing FSR to quality, we get an average of 38 FPS, which is highly playable. And 1080p is the resolution most people are playing. For sure, that's the best setting for the GTX 1060 6GB. We are in the high 90s of usage, the memory is at 5.4GB of usage. So here you have it, your proposed minimum requirement. I'll give you an idea if your PC can run a mostly negative game. I didn't even read why it was a mostly negative review. But here you have it, the proposed minimum requirement, which make no sense. We still don't know if they were aiming at 30 FPS or 60 FPS and 720p or 1080p. Only thing we figure out was the GTX 1060, you need the 6GB variant. Next up will be the real minimum requirement, and not because I like the game, but because I really have the footage. On that note, thanks to everyone watching, and see you in the next one. Subscribe.